Assalamu alaikum. So my topic is a little bit different from the topics we've seen so far. I'll be talking about the importance of tradition. Do we preserve it? Do we change it? And how it can possibly adapt in the modern world without losing its essence. The important thing to realize about tradition is that, etymologically speaking, at least from a linguistic point of view, at least in the Latin language, tradere or traditio means something that is handed down. But it's a body of law, it's a set of customs, ideas, principles, values, beliefs that are handed down from generation to generation. The important thing, though, is to understand that because it is handed down from the past to the present and into the future, it is like a trajectory or an arrow. Traditions already suggest, point, and indicate a future possibility. They don't determine it, but they do at least point in that direction. As a river that's moving from the past to the present and the future, traditions are of immense value and sustenance. Like a river that sustains our lives, traditions sustain our very existence. But why do we preserve traditions? There are a number of reasons why. I'll summarize them in two. First, traditions are living wisdoms. From the ancients to the present, to the future, people have preserved the accumulated knowledge, the treasure troves of wisdom handed down from generation to generation, precisely because traditions bear within them principles, values, moral directions and dispositions, and truths that we can't possibly discover on our own. If you think of the depository of sacred knowledge that you possess, and we possess today, it's all because it was handed down from generation to generation. In fact, in many ways, if you think about it, this river of knowledge, this river of sustenance that comes down to us makes us stronger and makes us, as individuals, as a culture, as a civilization, more powerful, more nourished, and infinitely wiser. Without traditions, you'd have to reinvent the wheel with every generation. Without traditions, you'd have to reinvent agriculture. You'd have to reinvent almost everything. Traditions are what bear and carry these truths and these practices and these wisdoms down to us. In many ways, then, if you think about it, traditions are the very forms of knowledge that amplify our intrinsic capacities to be truly human. Another important reason why we and cultures preserve traditions and individuals preserve traditions is because traditions anchor. They provide root, they provide origin, and they provide foundations. Whether it's a question of identity or a question of moral principles and values, traditions provide those anchors that give us a foundation in our movement forward. However, not everything that comes down to us from tradition is of equal worth. Not everything that is handed down from generation to generation needs to be preserved or adapted. Some of it has to be overhauled and changed completely. And when we look at that aspect, we realize that we have a fundamental question. It's not a new question, really. It's not even a moral dilemma, but it is presented as one. In the past few centuries, of course, especially in Western culture and Western civilization, there's been a tension that's emerged between the past and the future, between the option of preserving and the option of evolving and developing. This has resulted in a certain cultural tendency that we've inherited, whether we like it or not, to have some kind of a bias or prejudice against the past, or everything from the past. When you think of preservation, you think of something that's backward-looking, imitation of the past, often associated with institutions and practices that we don't want to be affiliated with. Usually conservatives and religious people are often labeled as conservatives or those who want to preserve the past. And people who think of the future are forward-looking, who want innovation, and in the name of a dynamic spirit want to improve the human condition. But this is a false dilemma. The tension between preservation and evolution is an arbitrary one and an artificial one. It's born of a particular cultural moment in the West the past few centuries, where, particularly with the progress of science and technology and a whole host of other cultural factors that I can't get into right now, we've developed a sense of, if we want to improve the human condition, the only way we can do so is by turning the leaf, a new page, and turning our back on the past. If actually you look at some of these terms and their contemporary associations, when you think of preserving or when you think of the past, You think of something that's backward-looking, conservative, and imitation. Any one of these terms in the left column, they have negative connotations. But there's nothing intrinsically wrong with the notion of preserving. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with the notion of the past. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with the notion of backward. But today we use the word backward to mean something that's undeveloped or something that is the opposite of what is good. Backward is just the opposite of forward. We look back towards our roots in order to look forward towards future possibilities. The word even conservative means to conserve something, to protect it and keep it upon its form because it is of recognized value. Whether it's a moral value, whether it's a truth value, or whether it's a practical value. Imitation. When we think of imitation, what do we think? None of us wants to be associated with imitating anything. We have to rehabilitate the significance of these terms because, as we'll see shortly, all of these terms are extremely important for what it means to be human and for what it means to possess a culture. Evolving, forward, progressive innovation. The associations are always positive, aren't they? Right? And they're future-oriented. But rather than think of mutually exclusive, polar opposite options, we actually have to think of them as a spectrum of colors that seamlessly blend into one another. I'm going to do something unconventional. I'm going to draw on tradition to show how we can be innovative. In the classical Arab-Islamic tradition, there were three key terms that have been developed by many scholars that reflect a more nuanced understanding of how we relate past, present, and future. Many scholars in the Islamic tradition have pored over the question of what it means to produce meaning, purpose, significance, existential meaning and purpose, cultural identity. How do we relate to the past? How do we move forward? These are not new questions presented by the modern age. But the modern age, as I showed you earlier, and a lot of modern tendencies offer us a false dichotomy. Many cultural traditions around the world, including the Islamic, have actually a much more nuanced approach to this question. These three terms I'm going to introduce you to, and then I'm going to break it down and explain each one. The first is the notion of innovation. The second is the notion of emulation. The third is the notion of imitation. Let me start with imitation. And I'm using these terms deliberately because I know it has negative connotations. But by the end of this presentation, hopefully you'll have a positive connotation. Imitation means reproducing something exactly, mirroring. But not just anything, something of strong foundations and principles. Remember I said earlier that traditions are a river of life that comes to us from the past. Why? Because either sacred revelation or truths or moral realities and dispositions that we hold dear were revealed at some point, or the accumulated wisdom of trial and error over time has been refined over generation and generation and has come to us in a certain form. Imitation is an absolute necessary part of what it means to be human at the individual level, at the cultural level, at the civilizational level. None of us want to be associated with imitation. But I've got news for you. Imitation is absolutely necessary for growth, absolutely necessary for development. What do we imitate? What do we mirror? Or what do we attune ourselves to? Think of any higher moral truth or spiritual truth that comes from the celestial realms through revelation or inspiration. What do? We try to attune ourselves, we try to mirror within our own being these higher order patterns of meaning and purpose. Why? Because by aligning ourselves and our entire being, by mirroring these higher realities within our own life, whether it's in our institutions or the way we do things or the way we think about things, what do? We're aligning ourselves, mirroring and attuning ourselves to a reality and a rhythm that lifts us out of our contingent human reality and allows us to realize something that we can't possibly achieve and realize on our own. Right? So there are certain realities in life, whether culture or individual, that need a mirroring relationship where we attune ourselves to it, we configure ourselves in its image, call it imitation, call it copying, call it mirroring, call it attuning. Right? But they're fundamental aspects of what it means to be human. I'm going to go to the other side of this spectrum, innovation. Innovation means creating something entirely new, invention, right? Change, evolution, call it what you want. It's also an absolutely important aspect of culture, an important aspect of civilization, important aspect of an individual's journey through life. We need to understand and explore new possibilities, and certain aspects of our lives, certain aspects of our culture and civilization require a high degree of this kind of innovation. Think of, for example, science and technology. Right? We innovate new ways of thinking about and applying certain kind of theories about the nature of the physical world, and we translate that into advanced technological tools. We can't, for example, just inherit agricultural practices from 1,000 years ago and accept them the way they are. Right? So there are certain domains of life and reality where innovation is absolutely necessary. But this is the key. And this is where this perspective teaches us something radically different. In our modern understanding of innovation, we understand innovation as innovation for innovation's sake. It's a mantra that's been repeated again and again for the past 100 years. But from this perspective, innovation isn't for its own sake. Innovation is always within the flux of that river of life that comes to us from the past, that anchors us in higher truths and moral principles, and gives us a guidance and a direction as to where we innovate and in which direction. Right? Scholars say absolute innovation is only the prerogative of a divine being. God creates something out of nothing. What we do is we create something from something. Right? From towards. And that from, unless we're anchored in it, unless we're rooted in it, we have no idea where to innovate towards. Right? So innovation is absolutely important, but in this understanding of innovation, it's always something that's anchored and rooted in the flowing stream of moral principles, spiritual perspectives, and higher truths that guide us towards the realization of our highest potential as individuals or cultures or civilizations. Now, in between innovation and imitation, there's something else. Something that's neither imitation, it's not an exact mirroring process where we're mirroring something and becoming like it exactly, nor is it a question of innovation or inventing something entirely new. It's something somewhere in between. It's both and. Emulation is a process whereby I follow an exemplary model, whether it's a person or a principle, and I invent or create or develop or engender new variations of it. Let me give you an example. In the realm of law, for example, we embody, we inherit, we mirror principles that transcend our contingent daily reality and the historical period we're living in. But at the same time, we need to find new ways, engender new ways of applying these moral principles in new situations. So in the legal world, for example, in our social practices, we neither do innovation entirely nor imitation entirely, somewhere in between. The important thing to realize and learn is that all these processes are absolutely necessary in every domain of life. So the question then becomes applying the right approach in the right domain. I've given a few examples here. Imitation or mirroring or attuning ourselves is a process by which we align ourselves with truths, realities that transcend us. We're not the authors of truth. We can discover truth, but we don't create it. In the example of religious rituals or beliefs or practices, and the sacred text, for example, we imitate, we copy, we mirror. We don't invent religious texts. We don't invent the way in which we pray. We don't invent our beliefs. These come from another world that transcends time and space, and it transcends the contingent realities of the changing flux of everyday life. In the realm of innovation, science and technology, and in the realm of emulation, perhaps social practices and culture. The question then becomes, is this the domain of imitation, emulation, or innovation? It's a very important question we have to ask ourselves. We don't go willy-nilly applying absolute innovation and creativity in every domain. Right? We have to ask ourselves, in which domain do we apply which one? The solution then, a more balanced approach perhaps, is evolution within preservation, or innovation within tradition, or creativity within continuity. Rather than asking whether to preserve or evolve, we should be asking when, what, and how do we preserve or protect, and when, how, and what do we evolve and change. As we are often prone to say at Usul Academy, where I teach an academic director, we always innovate for the future, by rooting ourselves in the past. To be the creative pioneers of the future, we have to be the trustworthy custodians of the past. Thank you.